So I think in the hockey space, it's about really just talking about these things and everyone being comfortable talking about them and having these conversations, because that's something that currently doesn't exist in our community. So, really just having educated yourself, everyone across the board, and are comfortable talking about it and sharing what you've learned with others, especially those who have a different stance on it than you, because if you're able to talk about it with a bunch of like-minded individuals, that's great, but then you have to be able to also handle that confrontation when somebody doesn't see eye to eye with you.
And, it's easy for me when someone else is being a jerk in the locker room or whatever to just be like, stop being an asshole, because it's that simple. But when it's on a world scale, and you're dealing with, people getting murdered and people not qualifying for mortgages and things that are life altering, it's sad. And I don't think that we as white people get to say when we've achieved anti-racism. I think that is up to the Black community, and that we have to continue to educate ourselves and our peers and our children to a point where we don't breed hatred and we don't judge people based on how they look. We just treat them the way that we want to be treated, because we love everybody like we love each other, and like we love ourselves. We love each other like we love ourselves. And unfortunately, I think that there's a long way to go, but I think that we just need to find a way to weed out the evil people.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Social Justice in Women's Hockey. I am your host, Erica L. Ayala. On this episode, I am joined by Rebecca Morse, aka Moose, and Madison Packer. They are captains of the Metropolitan Riveters in the National Women's Hockey League. We have a critical conversation, but it is all framed around 6 questions. And so the question of the day is actually a series of questions. So here are your questions of the day, posting them up for you now, but they're all surrounding questions and key questions we should be asking when having conversations about anti-racism. I want to thank Packer and Moose for joining me on this episode. We have a great conversation. And another little bonus engagement activity for you. I am naming this episode, title is #BlackRosie. So once you get to the part where you think you figured out why we named this Black Rosie, go ahead and type that in the comments. As always, thank you so much for joining me on this series, Social Justice in Women's Hockey. We've had a lot of amazing conversations with some wonderful people in hockey, and we hope it continues. So here now is my conversation with Madison Packer and Moose. The last 2 kind of questions that I want to leave the audience thinking about and asking us all to reflect on is, speaking of like sayings and stuff, Stephen Covey, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, always says to begin with the end in mind. So the question that I'd like us to end on, and I'll give you some time to think of it, about how you want to respond to it, is, when will we know that we've achieved anti-racism? Like, yay, we did it. But while you're thinking about that, another question that I get a lot, just people sliding all up in the DMs, and every time they see me now, I've like put myself in this conversation. I'm kind of somewhat joking, but the question of where to start. And I want to ask you both this question again. You are leaders for the Riveters, and Moose, you hit on this. Packer, you live with the PA director. But I want to specifically ask you both, where would you like women's hockey to start? Where would you like the NWHL to start? Where would you like the Riveters to start when it comes to this conversation of anti-racism?
I think for me, I think that the You Can Play project has a great slogan, but like I feel like I walk into the locker room every day with the Riveters, and that's how I feel. Like I feel like it doesn't matter what I look like, who I am, how I live my life or identify. My teammates love me, but with everything that's gone on and is continues to go on in the world, it's the first time where I've stopped and thought, maybe someone sitting next to me doesn't feel that way. So I think for me, it starts with committing to making sure that everyone on my team, whether it's, how they identify from a gender standpoint or their sexuality or the color of their skin, their religion, whatnot, they know that I love them no matter what, that they have a place in my locker room no matter what. And I think that that's something that we have always had, but I recognize that that's how I've always felt. And so just committing to making sure that my teammates feel that way and pushing, using my in with the PA and seeing if we can make sure that everyone within that's really how we feel as the NWHL and the players within it.
I think one big thing that I've sort of recognized recently is anyone watches the video of George Floyd, obviously very tough to watch, but I think that the natural human response is to think that that is completely wrong, right? But there's a difference between just thinking it's wrong and then taking action or like caring enough to follow through, take the next step and educate yourself. And I think that is where we struggle, where like at least in my hockey community, pretty much across the board, people agree like that is not okay for a police officer to be killing a Black man when he's clearly saying that, he can't breathe and is not threatening at all, right? It's just common human decency. And like Packer said, like hatred is a learned behavior. So I think at our core, like we realize the problem with that happening. But then where it falls off is some people feel so inclined, feel strongly enough to move forward and educate themselves, and others don't. Others just say, okay, that's wrong. I agree that that's wrong, but I'm going to leave it at that. They haven't found their voice yet, or they're not at that maturity level yet to sort of take matters into their own hands. And when I say take matters into their own hands, really just starts with you. You don't have to go out and broadcast anything to anyone else. Really just educate yourself and then determine what you want to do with that education. That's the first step. And you have, like you said, having an end goal in mind, yes, but I think just figuring out, gathering all the information before you actually make your stance is very important, because if you're just closing the door to that as an option, to realizing that you could practice allyship, like that could potentially be you, or you could be more active in promoting diversity inclusion. You don't know until you watch 13th or When They See Us, or I've been listening to a podcast called White Lies that NPR does about in 1965, a white Reverend James Reed, who it's a cold case, and they're investigating this cold case where three men were tried and acquitted, but no one was ever held to account. And this white civil rights activist, who's a minister in the Northeast, came down to Selma, Alabama, and was murdered. And I'm not through it all the way, but I'm just learning so much. And that's about a white man that was killed, right? That was essentially covered up, which maybe some people, white people, might have an easier time absorbing something like that and understanding it that way. But really, in gathering all this knowledge and educating myself, I've determined how I want to navigate it. And I'm still refining that. And I think that will continue. But until you make that leap to actually consume something that you're going to learn from and get the real story, because what we've been taught in history class is not the real story. And I feel like almost like I've been like lied to my whole life, right?
Yeah.
And we need to get to that point where education, where it's being taught, American history is being taught the right way, because it's going to start with the younger generation.
Yeah. I reacted to a lot of what you both said.
Well,
And
to add on to that, sorry.
No, go for it, please.
I lost my train of thought, but to add on to that, in terms of like the Riveters and next season, I think what I want to do is help my teammates feel more comfortable educating themselves. It's up to you how you want to feel about it, because you can't push activism on somebody, right? All you can try to do is open their mind a little bit more and get them to actually put in the work and then develop their own opinions. That's really, I think, where I want to go with it, because I do see people around me who might not have done that yet. And it's at a point where you have to right now, and at least even if you're not going to be part of the allyship or active or outspoken about anti-racism, at least you educated yourself and you know, at the very minimum. I mean, I'm not personally satisfied with that, but at least you know. And one big thing that I've been pushing for is, obviously the Riveters logo is Rosie the Riveter, right? Rosie's white. I think about a young black girl who looks at our logo and can't see herself. You can't be what you can't see, right? Or to flip that positively, you can be what you can see. So I've suggested to the Riveter staff in conversations with them and feedback I've given to the NWHL is to incorporate a version of the Riveters logo that has different skin tones of Rosie the Riveter. And that's something that I feel really passionately about, and why I'm mentioning it right now, because it's so easy to deliver on that. It's something so small that it needs to happen, because that's the way that we're gonna grow the game. It's in everyone's best interest, and I want little children of all races to be able to see themselves, whether it's on the Riveters roster, in women's hockey, across women's hockey, or something as simple as the logo, because that it seems so trivial. The fact that Rosie is white, and obviously our logo is modeled after the iconic poster, essentially, and that's the way it was. But that's also perpetuating history, right? Because that's not, in all contexts, it's not always a white Rosie. Like, that isn't factual 100% of the time. So that's something that I've talked with Soraya Tinker about too as well, and I'm really going to continue to push for, and the league seems pretty open to it, so I'm happy about that. But that's just one small thing that we can do that can lead to other bigger initiatives as well.
Yeah, before you got started again, I was going to say that, like, I did say that I reacted a lot to what both of you said, but like that right there, yeah, like I need that, and I didn't even know that I needed it until, and I texted Fitzy the other day. She had a helmet where she had two Rosies, and they were working on her helmet, and one of them was black. And until she had that helmet, I never even thought twice about that in history there were black women that were also working in factories during World War II. And I'm someone who I'd like to think, I'm pretty plugged in, and, like, as the young kids like to say, woke. But I never even thought of that. And that's exactly what you're saying, is that we as a society are perpetuating one version of history. And, another thing, again, I think it's pretty well documented. I am a Riveters fan, but a joke that I used to make is, when I got my first Riveters jersey, I looked down and I was like, wow, I've got like this white woman's face on my chest. Like, what's up with that? Like, it just kind of was like, and I'd watched the team the whole season, and like, I know it, and I just looked down and I was like, wow, this is all right. I mean, just a little weird for me. So, from a joke, I left it off with a joke, but like emotionally, you know, having that conversation and sitting down with Fitzy and being able to ask her about that helmet. And I loved what she said, because she said the person who did the artwork just did it, and she felt she didn't need to be asked if it was okay. She saw it, and it was perfectly fine. And I honestly didn't expect her to say that. And I think also that's unlearning, right? That has to be done. And some people aren't going to like that I'm going to say this, but I'm going to say it anyway. I'm talking to Black people or multicultural people right now. We also have to realize that we come with information that is informed by white supremacy and by racism, even when we're trying to have conversations about anti-racism. And sometimes we have to really practice what we're asking white people to do. Again, for me, that was definitely Harrison Brown helped me do that. Fitzy with her helmet and, you know, me looking down at a white face on my fucking chest, you know, helped me do that. But that's work, and that's not always comfortable work, because even the system of white supremacy tells me I'm oppressed. Like, I'm Black, I'm Latina, you know, I grew up relatively poor or middle class, and you know, I'm the oppressed person, right? But that's otherness, right? That's exactly what this system wants, is that, you know, my pain, I focus so much on that I'm not looking at ways that I can make other people's pain and oppression better. And that's not okay. That's also not okay. So all of that to say, now we're getting to the good stuff here. So, you know, the question is, and the final question, you know, when will we know that we have achieved anti-racism?
I don't know. I don't think that there is really an answer, I guess. I think that that's up to the African American community to tell, like, when they can walk into a room and not feel uncomfortable, or like that's the answer, is when the African American community can experience things the same way that I have formerly, and, you know, continue to today get to experience without hesitation or fear. And, you know, when you were talking, I've a couple of times I've gotten emotional when we've been on the call, because it makes me sad. Like, I've had a lot of conversation with Moose, and this is not at all about me. And that's also hard for me, because I don't feel like, it's hard for me when I don't feel like I can fix something. And I feel like my ability to change is so small. And that's really frustrating to me, because I feel like there are other areas where you can see a measurable improvement or change made. And with this, you're relying on everybody pulling their weight equally. And I think that's really frustrating. So I think that, you know, it's important to me that nobody is ever made to feel lesser or different or excluded. And that's something that I focus a lot on with myself, and I pride myself on. And, you know, it's easy for me when someone else is being a jerk in the locker room or whatever to just be like, stop being an asshole, because it's that simple. But when it's on a world scale, and you're dealing with, you know, people getting murdered and people not qualifying for mortgages and things that are life altering, it's sad. And I don't think that we as white people get to say when we've achieved anti-racism. I think that is up to the Black community, and that we have to continue to educate ourselves and our peers and our children, to a point where we don't breed hatred and we don't judge people based on how they look. We just treat them the way that we want to be treated, because we love everybody like we love each other, and or like we love ourselves. We love each other like we love ourselves. And unfortunately, I think that there's a long way to go, but I think that we just need to find a way to weed out the evil people. I don't know what that is. But.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's difficult for someone outside of the Black community to definitively say, okay, we've achieved anti-racism. racism. I think it's important for people who are part of the allyship to check in with the Black community and say, okay, what do we need to tackle next? Like, check this off our list. This has been resolved. What's next? So that you feel more equal and you feel comfortable talking in a certain space. But I think from a hockey standpoint, and I've said it before on the ice, at the rink, I've never seen color. I think I can speak for a lot of people I've played with in saying that. And by that, I mean color never factored into how I perceived or treated a teammate or opponent. Their skill level, their character, whatever it may be, doesn't really play a role. Like, to me, they're just a person and a hockey player. But that's part of the problem. Some just ignore the lack of diversity or the fact that our Black peers are constantly inhabiting a white space. Others are ignorant to it and don't think about how their words or actions might impact a Black player. And part of the reason is because we don't have those conversations regularly in the locker room. Like, we come to the locker room and we're serious and focused when we need to be, and then we joke around when we are able to. And it's a good balance of that, but we don't talk about serious issues. And that's part of the problem. So I think in the hockey space, it's about really just talking about these things and everyone being comfortable talking about them and having these conversations, because that's something that currently doesn't exist in our community. So, really just having educated yourself, everyone across the board, and are comfortable talking about it and sharing what you've learned with others, especially those who have a different stance on it than you. Because if you're able to talk about it with a bunch of like-minded individuals, that's great. But then you have to be able to also handle that confrontation when somebody doesn't see eye to eye with you. So I think that comfort and being able to talk to others with opposing views and share your knowledge is really where we need to get to first. And then throughout this process, and having an ongoing conversation, checking in with members of the Black community and saying, okay, how are we doing on this? Like, how can I help you achieve your goals and our goals, essentially, because they should be the same. But with that personal experience of growing up, identifying as Black, we're not in your shoes as those who aren't in that community. So it's important to hear feedback and then go on and make improvements from there once we see incremental successes.
The only thing, that I would add to what both of you said is that, the challenge that I bring to the communities, particularly from the race and ethnicity that I identify as being Black Latina, I want to challenge us to continue to do the work of, again, anti-Black racism, but also make sure that we are first focusing on the entire Black community. I think, unfortunately, I've been to a lot of peaceful protests. I have a lot of shirts from hands up, don't shoot, to I can't breathe, hands up for Ferguson, so many hashtags. But this is the first time, and maybe honestly, because of being in the women's hockey space, maybe I'm just noticing it, but where I've heard that Black trans lives have been uplifted as well, as an example. I think that when I have conversations with people in Canada, obviously Canada is a huge part of the hockey community, and folks are talking more about Indigenous communities. To me, that's also important. And there is a focus, and I think it's important to have a focus on racism. But racism, as I was alluded to earlier for my TED Talk one day, but racism is a tool of white supremacy and imperialism. I mean, that's just history, right? That's a very, I don't think there's any arguing that imperialism and white supremacy has impacted the entire globe and the global society. So for me, if and when we even in this country, in the United States, were to, accomplish being anti-racist, for me, that means that we have also come to terms with how we as a society have allowed imperialism and white supremacy to negatively impact other communities of color, other multicultural identities, other gender identities, and I feel like the conversation is just we're just at the start of that conversation of true intersectional allyship, and that to me is really exciting. I really appreciate what both of you brought to the table. You know I love you more than my luggage, both of you, and I've told that to you privately and on all of my podcasts that you've been on, so no secret. But again, this has been a tough process for me as well. We talked a little offline about that. Even with people that, again, I think that I have a working and personal relationship with, this has been tough for me. But I welcome the challenge, and I'm glad that you both were here for it.
Thank you so much, Erica, for stepping outside your comfort zone and just investing the time to do this work, because we can all agree there's a huge need for it. And, there aren't a lot of people like you, quite frankly, across pro sports or just sports in general. And sports need more people who are willing to have these conversations and bring them into the fold, because it's been so taboo. And it's just like something we don't talk about. But at the end of the day, it's in everyone's best interest. And I truly believe that sports are a microcosm of society. So that's why in the position that we're in, we have a responsibility. And when I say we, it's not just the players, it's media, it's staff, it's people who clean our locker rooms, for example. Everyone plays a role in society and has their own networks, and I think it's gonna start there. Being a leader in your community, and I think hopefully people will take notice and realize that it is okay to talk about these things. It's more than okay. It's crucial. So thank you.
Thanks, Moose.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I've always appreciated your ability to lean in and have the hard conversation. I think that I would like to see at some point, if possible, the NWHL establishes some kind of like zero tolerance policy. I think that that's hugely important. I'm not that punishment always deters behavior, but I think that, the further we get out in front of it, and if we can see that more across sports and, our country, just that we don't associate with people who say hateful things or act in a hateful way. And if you choose to live your life that way, you're not going to play in the NWHL. You're not going to play in the MLB. You're not going to be on this television show, whatever it might be. And slowly people learn that that's just not how you live your life.
I'd love to see it. I'm here for it. So, well, again, thank you both. Oh, you lost us? Still got you?
Just for a second.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
It's all good. You might have to put your picture over your screen's really fuzzy. It's all good. It's all good. We know what you look like. We know what you look like. Before I let you both go, do you remember the name of, there was a security guard, young guy, black, a little stocky, but I used to call him Black Rosie, because he and I were like, yo, we need to get a Black Rosie jersey. And when you said that, Moose, I immediately thought of him. He, had like a little mustache going. Do you guys know who I'm talking about?
At Barnabas?
At Barnabas, yeah.
So
I know exactly who you're talking about. I don't remember his name.
I can't remember his name.
I know exactly who you're talking about.
Black Rosie. I loved that. I legitimately almost cried. I was like, I gotta keep it together. That was awesome.